Good afternoon, everyone. It's Lisa Norell, episode 43. Why creating your legacy now is an essential role for every marketer. So welcome to everyone joining us, and let us know where you're from in the comments as we simulcast. Before we welcome Alan Weiss, our wonderful guest, let us take 30 seconds of silence to commemorate the 20-year anniversary of September 11th and the many fallen. Thank you. And now on today's program, what I'm going to share with you as we launch into episode 43 might shock you. And it's all around the term legacy. I believe that the term legacy is simply outdated. The definition that you find is not working in today's world. Look at the crises we've all endured: 9/11, the pandemic, economic ups and downs. And if there's one thing I've learned is now is the time to polish our personal playbook. And that's why I'm thrilled to have someone with us today who understands that wholeheartedly and viscerally, and has come out with a book that explains this in great detail with some wonderful stories. We've got to write our stories and our legacies now, not when everything is perfect, not when things are always going smoothly. In this latest book from Alan Weiss, this might be book number 61 for Alan, he unpacks the topic of your legacy being now. And we're thrilled that you're here to have this discussion with us and post your comments. So welcome, everyone. And let's talk about Alan Weiss for a minute. 60 books, 61 books translated in dozens of languages. He's been called the rock star of consulting and has built an extraordinary life, as well as being the father of two humans. He and his wife also are the parents of two great dogs. So what a legacy that is. Let's welcome Alan Weiss.
Hello.
Alan, good afternoon.
Hi, 43 is my lucky number.
It is.
Now I'm lying.
Well, you never know if you're into numerology or something like that. We're going to be
I'm a Pisces on the verge of something. I don't know.
There you go. Good. So we have a Pisces and a Leo today. Alan, I'm so happy you're here today. We've been collaborating now for close to 17 years. And I followed you as I lived on one coast and moved back to the East Coast. And it's just been a wild ride. And I appreciate everything you've done to mentor me over the years.
Oh, it's a pleasure knowing you, Lisa. And I'm glad we were able to do this today.
Me too. Tell me, in the middle of a pandemic, you chose to write Your Legacy Is Now. What was the moment that you realized you needed to write this book?
I've written more books on consulting than anyone in history. And the focus has been on value-based fees in the third edition just came out this week, as a matter of fact. And I started to ask myself, why are people having so much trouble charging for what they're worth? And I realized it was a question of esteem. So I started to look into esteem and write about esteem and self-worth and so forth. And then I asked myself the question, why is self-esteem so difficult? And I realized that it's really about, it's about people's view of the world, and it's about who they think they should be. The trouble is, when I ask people I coach, who do you want to be next year? They answer by telling me what they want to be doing. It's a different question, so it's the wrong answer. And Seinfeld's got this great routine. Seinfeld says once that he's giving a eulogy for a person who's passed away. And he says, according to statistics, there's a greater fear of public speaking than of dying. So I'm more nervous than the guy in the box, he says. And, if you know as well as I do in terms of consulting and coaching and marketing, if somebody wants to sell a business, you don't increase the valuation the week before you want to sell it. You should be increasing valuation all along. You make more money. And when you're ready, it's all set to sell. Well, with legacy, you don't create it when you're deathly ill or on your deathbed or getting ready to pack it in. Legacy should occur every day. And that's why I got interested in it.
Yes, and you've always believed in that. Ever since I first met you, you weren't waiting around to impart your wisdom and to be generous towards others. You've been active in the world of nonprofits. You've helped a lot of people launch their consultancies from ground zero, really. And you've also worked with consultants and entrepreneurs who are running multi-million-dollar businesses. So, what's your legacy now? Like, what are you creating over the next year that you think excites you the most?
Well, I'll give you both the strategy and the tactics. The strategy is I want to make my work available to just about anyone. All right. Sometimes it's very expensive to work with me, deliberately so. But I've created this. The tactic is I've created this global program. I launched it about a month or so ago. It's $115, and you get 14 modules and all this kind of stuff. I'm not trying to sell it here, but my point is, I've done it for people, especially overseas, especially in Asia and Africa and Latin America. People who don't get to see me, people who find it hard to get close to me. And I want to make this work available to everyone so they can build their own lives. And my feeling is that at this stage of the game, I want to help all entrepreneurs I can to live a life that's meaningful and important by helping others. I have a philosophy, Lisa, that we don't have any right to consume wealth or consume happiness without creating wealth and happiness. So if you look at a carbon footprint, that's the human equivalent to the carbon footprint, the humanity equivalent.
Yes. In fact, I marked up your book quite a bit, Alan. And one of my favorite aphorisms that you said is meaning is about improvement, not protection, growth, and not defensiveness. Tell us a little bit more behind what's behind that.
I have found that the best people I've ever coached, business executives, entrepreneurs, and so on, are vulnerable. And by vulnerable, I mean they're willing to share defeats and uncertainties and mistakes. And that's how they grow. And I have something called the lobster principle. And lobsters are fascinating. I'm fascinated by strange things, but no one knows. I mean, we've got we've got a Mars rover right now with its own chopper on Mars, but we don't know how old lobsters get. We don't know how big lobsters get because lobsters molt. So they have an exoskeleton. And when a lobster gets too big for its skeleton, it molts, sheds a cell, goes and hides from predators, and then it gets bigger and it grows into exoskeleton. And this presumably can go on for a long, long time. And so they found the lobster once that weighed 80 pounds. And they found one once they thought was 100 years old. Thank God they put it back. And as these lobsters get big, they're not so afraid of predators anymore, right? So they find there's a clam called a quahog here in Rhode Island, which is also found in Arctic waters. They found one the other day, 500 years old and doing quite well. Thank you very much. And so if you're vulnerable and these lobsters have to shed, have to molt, that's when you get bigger. And I found that people don't grow unless they're willing to be vulnerable, and that allows them to get bigger.
Vulnerability is a tough one for a lot of people. I'll share an example. I am now entering the 10th year anniversary of the Marketing Growth Leaders, which is a private peer community of chief marketing officers and VPs of marketing who want to have a seat at the table in growth discussions with the leadership team, or they want to get promoted faster. And it's very fascinating, Alan, because I speak with hundreds of CMOs a year. And periodically, when the going gets tough, or they're on sketchy ground with their careers, or they have a personal issue, some of them run away. They hide. They don't want to speak to anyone because they're afraid to be vulnerable. How can they overcome that?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways. Last night, Tom Brady wins the opening football game of the season at 44 years old. And he wins it in the last 1:40 with no times out by driving his team 50, 60 yards down the field, cool as a cucumber, for the winning score. And so Brady has this intrinsic confidence that he can win. And the reason he can win is he's lost. He's lost a Super Bowl besides the ones he's won. He's won, he's been sacked. He knows what it's like to lose, and he knows what it's like to get hurt. And so we all have to know, Lisa, what it's like to lose and get hurt. And that's a growth. Now, I'll tell you something, a growth factor. I'll tell you something else. If you look at Brady or, Tiger Woods or anybody on top of their game in sports, in education, in business, in entertainment, no matter what, the best people all have coaches. And they recognize the fact that if they don't have coaches, they breathe their own exhaust. It's the people who are afraid of sharing vulnerabilities, afraid of sharing what they're afraid of, even with their partners or with a coach or with other people with whom they should be intimate, that can't grow. And so I think what people have to understand is that you don't overcome your fears by running from them. You overcome your fears by dealing with them. I was scared out of my mind to go on the roller coaster. And my father just shamed me into it. My father was a paratrooper in World War II. And he took me on the parachute jump in Coney Island, which, I mean, scared me so much I can remember it to this day. People looking like ants. Said, we're going to go down and, it's guided. I'm saying, yeah, you're a paratrooper. But he said, okay, now that you can do that, you can go on the Cyclone. And he dragged me on this roller coaster. But we went on the side, and I said, hey, that was great. And after that, I went on every roller coaster in the front seat, fanatically. So once you face your fears, you can become really good because you decide, okay, it's nothing, or maybe I don't need this, or you decide, what am I missing? So when people say to me, uni, I'm not eating uni. Well, have you ever tasted it? No.
It's a great way to live your life, Alan, and you do live out loud. We have a couple people visiting. I want to shout out to Roger joining us from North Carolina, who applauds us for, yes, Roger, 61 books.
Roger, I go for volume, not accuracy, Roger. That's the reason.
Well, I was going to say it's about value, not volume, but Alan, you live in both worlds. Oh, Charlene.
Charlene was the speaker at my Thought Leadership Conference, and I worked with her. She set up her community on disruptive influences. She's fabulous.
Charlene is absolutely fabulous. Speaking of roller coaster, I want to give a shout out to Charlene because I think it was like live stream number 3. And I contacted Charlene and I said, Charlene, could you please be a guest on my live stream? And she taught me some of the ins and outs of live streaming, and she came on my show and we just had a great time. And I was definitely feeling like it was one of my first roller coaster rides, and she's still my friend. So there's that.
Yeah, she's a great lady. Robbie Kelvin Baxter is here, who deals with the membership economy, very original stuff. But next to me in real time, I saw Robbie Kelvin Baxter eat a steak bigger than her head. Ask her.
Next book, who do you think you are? Robbie, that is one of the mic drop moments of today's live stream for sure. Robbie's joining us from the San Francisco area. See, this is the joy of live streaming. And I call it life streaming because everyone here brings extra life to this conversation. So make sure you post your questions here. Namaste, Charlene. And let's hear from another guest who's joining us today from Washington, D.C. We have Crystal Putman Garcia, who is the CMO of Fiscal Note. Welcome, Crystal. What's your question for us?
Thank you for having me. So I was going to take us in a little bit of a different direction past the idea of vulnerability, but I would love to hear what you both think about the idea of how do you build your legacy and also build your brand at the same time, your personal brand with social media and things like that. We have a lot of different ways to portray ourselves, and I would just be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. You want to go first, Lisa? You want me to go?
I'd like you to go first, Alan, and then I'll share my perspective.
Okay, then you can correct me, right? Okay.
So, I will.
Crystal, thanks for the question. I don't think you can like the answer. A legacy and a brand are two different things. A brand is what you use to attract people to you. And so, my brand is my name. People who control a niche or thought leaders, the brand is their name. If they say, get me a good strategist and my name's in the hat, that's one thing. If they say, get Alan Weiss, that's something else. So a brand is how people think about you when you're not around. That's my working definition. Your legacy is how you impact people. It is how you influence people, not necessarily consciously all the time, not necessarily deliberately all the time, but it's how you impact them. And often what you'll find in legacy is you impact people even by the inadvertent that you say. Things like vulnerability, which we discussed, things like generosity, which we discussed. Generosity I think Joseph Epstein said this, the writer, but he said, generosity is not a factor of how much you give; it's what you have left after you give. And so that's a legacy of his that in fact is an example. Am I answering your question, Crystal?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
That's great. I will trail off that, and I will say brand is also something that happens. It's a both and from what Alan said. It is also something that affects and impacts all of your stakeholders and relationships as a CMO. And we've seen that through the pandemic, is that, brand now reaches so many other stakeholders that we have to think about. And also, I think being a CMO or a marketing professional who aspires to be a CMO, you have a really unique opportunity, because your brand for your own self, your thought leadership, and is one area you have to keep an eye on and cultivate, while also building the brand of the organization for whom you work. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and it's a bit of a juggling act, but it's achievable. I also believe that the legacy is something that can be woven into your brand, whether it be your organization's brand or your personal brand. And I think it's sadly very overlooked, Crystal. It's oftentimes all about the here and now and closing deals and, satisfying our shareholders. And sometimes it's forgotten, or as we saw with the Business Roundtable announcing the stakeholder signatures of 136 CEOs 2 years ago, sometimes it's just lip service. So it's incumbent on us as marketing leaders to make sure it's not lip service. Is that helpful, Crystal?
It is. Thank you for both of your perspectives.
We're so glad you joined us.
Thanks for having me.
Alan, I'm also curious. I looked up legacy in the dictionary. I couldn't really find a definition that I was comfortable with. And Robbie was just asking us earlier, how do you define legacy for all of our viewers across the world?
Well, to me, your legacy is what you create every day that influences people, hopefully positively, but it could be negatively as well, negative as well, as you know. And I tend to look at it this way. Every single day, no matter what your age, is a new page in your book. And the question is it the same page as yesterday? Or is the page blank? Or is someone else writing that page for you? Or are you creating a new page? That to me is the metaphor for legacy. And I think too often we're paying no attention to a new page, or someone else is creating it for us. And consequently, legacy should be more, well, you use the word sometimes intentional. It should be more intentional, more meaningful, more mindful. I think is another term used. And it can't just be left sort of to drift like a jellyfish, subject to the tides and the winds.
Yes. And speaking of which, one of the new areas that I am pursuing and that we launched just a week ago is we are now also streaming this in the podcast universe. So we now actually have the Mindful Marketer podcast, because we realized, Alan, after we launched the live streams, that sometimes people are busy out hiking, running, doing other cooking, and they can't watch the live stream. So we said, why don't we convert this into a podcast as well? So a shout out to my Serious Take Productions team and to Stefan for allowing us to test this new medium, for helping more people. And Alan, I also want to give you credit for something else that took me a few years to cultivate, and now I just do it very naturally. You talk about waking up in the morning and you have two choices. Mm-hmm. And people who are real legacy leaders understand this. You can wake up and go, oh my gosh, another slog through enemy territory. Or you can wake up and say, oh my gosh, it is a great day. How many people can I help today? And I love that. I love that distinction that you have shared with us over the years.
Well, thanks for the credit. If you extrapolate that, it means that if you're out to help people you have no problem talking to them. You have no problem approaching them. You have no problem intervening because you've got something to give them. But if you feel you're out there to take, you want to get money from them, then you're always going to feel bad about trying to intervene and approach them. And the other funny thing I think, or the lesson here, is that when I look at my dogs out here, you talked about my dogs, and when I look out here and they're running up the yard and if the gate's open, they don't stop at the gate and do a risk analysis. They don't stop and say, well, I think it's a 7. What do you think? You know, anything coming? I mean, it's just another yard. And so they could just go tearing through there, you know? And what we need to do in terms of legacy is to be more willing to tear through life. And not so hesitant and not so scared and not so bashful. And I'll give you just a couple of definitions, if I may. Confidence is the honest-to-God belief you can help other people. Arrogance is the honest-to-God belief you have nothing left to learn yourself. And smugness is arrogance without the talent. And so I skate right up to the line. I am extremely confident. Maybe sometimes I go over the line, I pull myself back, but I think that's where we need to be, frankly. That's how we get our expertise out there.
One of the platforms of expertise that a lot of us use now, because of some of the restrictions that COVID has imposed on our lifestyles, is that we have to do a lot of our work now behind a screen, Alan. And thankfully, some meetings are coming back and I'll be seeing you in person very soon, which is really great. There is a hybrid model evolving. In the meantime, though, social media is a preferred method of people helping others, getting the word out about their expertise. And yet it can be a real mosh pit. And there are random social norms that have evolved out of the social media outlets. When you're coaching C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, and people like myself, how do you help them avoid getting pulled into those social norms?
Well, there are two things to keep in mind. The first is you have to live by your own metrics. You cannot live by other people's metrics. And so, somebody does well and they say, well, I was good, but your sister did better. Oh my God, then I'm a failure, you know? You have to live by your own metrics. I have never coached anyone by telling them, here's what I did and here's what you have to do. What am I going to say? Write 60 books, have them translated into 15 languages. That's not very helpful. But if I say, here's how you can write a book, just one book, your first book, here's how you do it, here's a formula, then I'm helping people. And so you have to create metrics that are appropriate for other people. The second thing I would tell you, and by the way, let me just digress for a minute and say that social media is a morass of confirmation bias. And people tend to only follow people and read people and someone who agree with them. And, I think it was F. Scott Fitzgerald who said, an intellect is somebody that told opposing thoughts in his or her mind at one point, right, one time. So there's this morass of reinforcement for things you believe and not enough willingness to look at other things. But the second thing I wanted to mention is this. We have to isolate negatives and generalize positives. So let's just say I don't get a sale. Instead of saying, God, I'm a lousy marketer, what I say is, at this point in time, with this person, in this spot, I didn't get a sale. I isolate the negative. Now, if you think about this with your kids, right? If your kid makes a mistake on the soccer field and you say, hey, you're pretty clumsy out there, it's going to scar your kid for life. There's the baggage. But if you say that was a difficult kick, no one could have done that, that's different. And the reverse is, if your kid gets, a good mark on a history test, if they're still teaching history somewhere, you don't say you got lucky. You say, hey, you become a scholar. And the same thing for you. When you get that sale, you don't say, boy, oh boy, thank God. You say, I'm getting pretty damn good at this. So if we can do that, we're less vulnerable to all this other stuff. We control our own metrics.
Oh my goodness, someone's calling you Dr. Weiss. This is nice.
Yeah, it is nice. That
Rogers.
That and $1 gets me on a bus.
All right, Alan. Well, tell us one of your favorite takeaways from your new book and why you felt compelled to communicate that.
I think a dramatic takeaway is the fact that you need to look at your life strategically and not just tactically. So, for example, I said earlier, when I ask people who you want to be next year, they invariably tell me what they want to be doing. And so I think instead of, we all say, how are you? We might, years and years ago when people smoked, the most common printed phrase in the English language was close covered before striking. And I think today the most common a phrase that's stated as, how are you? We don't really care. How are you? Well, I got this. No, I didn't. Just, how are you? What we should be asking, though, is, how am I? What we should be saying is, how am I? And we should lead ourselves to a greater calling. I'll give you a very quick example. In the speaking profession, of which I know something, there's this trite, hackneyed story, right? You have a stonemason, and you say, what are you doing? The stonemason says, I'm laying bricks. You go to a second stonemason, you say, what are you doing? Stonemason, I'm building a cathedral, right? And so the moral of that story is, oh my God, building a cathedral, you're going to do such a better job. I think there's a third stonemason. And the third stonemason, when you ask what that person's doing, says, I'm bringing people closer to God. That's a calling. And so it's not a job, it's not a career, it's a calling. And what we need to create in life is a calling for ourselves. Nobody else is going to do it for us. And when you have a calling, you're fearless. You have passion. You pursue it diligently. And in so doing, you help others.
Thank you, Alan. You just reinforced what I had the courage to tell one of the world's early pioneers in what we call modern marketing. I just met with the CMO of he's been the CMO of several very successful software companies. And he was talking to him just this week. And he said, so what are you up to these days? I hadn't talked to him in 8 years. And this person has just had one success after the other. And he said, tell me more about what you're up to. And I said, well, I actually have one mission, which is to help marketing leaders really get promoted faster and build more sustainable companies. And I said, I actually have shut down some of the offerings in my portfolio that do not honor that mission. And he said, whoa, that took a lot of strength and courage. And I said, yes. And my business is up about 73% this year, because I got so clear that that is my calling, Alan. And I didn't want to do these other things that were, humming along, but didn't really advance that mission. It took some courage and it took some coaching, but I'm glad I did it.
Good for you.
So yes, even those of us, that have been at this, I've been running my consulting and coaching practice now for 20 years, and I still have to read your books, and I still have coaches helping me every week, because it's easy to forget some of these important tips and important strategies. I also want to welcome Henry, who's been with us on a number of shows now. Henry, it's great to see you here. And we also had, let's see. Oh, my goodness. We also have Ingrid joining us from Virginia. Wonderful to see you here. So yes. And we also, let's see who else is with us. Well, we have a few more people, but Chris is with us from Ottawa, Canada, CEO, who's been following us and is one of our, what I'll call our fanboys. So, Alan, as we kind of approach the top of the hour here, what are you working on next, other than this exciting community to reach people across the world? What else is on your plate?
Well, I think I had 5 books come out this year. Legacy, which you have there, is my original book. I updated value-based fees to the 3rd edition. I updated the Consulting Bible to the 2nd edition. And just today, I was told by Wiley they sold Chinese rights to the Consulting Bible. I've co-written a book with Nancy McKay in Canada called The Modern Trusted Advisor. It comes out in about a month. I've co-written a book with Lisa Lauder in Canada called Masterful Marketing. It'll come out next year. And I'm looking at co-authoring another book in December with somebody in my community. So those are some of the, I love to write, and it's what I'm good at. And so those are things that I'm very proud of. I'm also looking at re-expanding, my view of the world now that we can travel again. So I'll be in Atlanta next week. I'll be in West Palm Beach the week after with one of my elite groups. And then in October, our whole family, we just all came back from Nantucket, which is God's country. And then my whole family's going to the Grand Canyon. And then we're going to go over to Vegas. And then I'm going to go to San Diego and make a speech in San Diego. So I hope next year I'll be able to do it internationally again. I'll be able to go to Sydney or London or wherever. Who knows? But I'm going to try. So that's my view of things. And I'm also, going more and more toward the human condition and not just consulting and not just coaching and so forth. And that's a great joy for me. I'm getting a lot of pleasure out of that.
Yes. And when you say you're going closer to the human condition, what kind of offers and value might that look like?
Well, I convey my expertise in a number of ways. So I have a podcast called The Uncomfortable Truth, and I'm orienting that more and more toward the human condition and not just toward business and so forth. I have a monthly video series, The Writing on the Wall, which features my dogs. That too is oriented more toward the human condition now. Balancing Act is my monthly newsletter. Monday Morning Memo is my weekly newsletter. So all of these vehicles, I'm orienting more toward that. And then, and those are all free. But for fee, I'm going to be doing workshops both remotely and in person on these topics. And I just did a Zoom session about 2 weeks ago on who do you want to be, and what comes after success. And a lot of people in my community have that question on their mind, either overtly or subliminally. But once you raise it, they say, "Yeah, what does come after success? I mean, what's next?" And it's a legitimate question. I wrote a book about a year or two ago called 3Score and More. I am outraged by the notion of retirement. I think it's stupid and silly. It's an artifact of the ancient past. There's no sense retiring. I mean, you could change jobs, you can change callings, you can do a lot of things. But if we're not constantly contributing, we're waiting around to die. And that's absolutely absurd.
I have no plans of retiring. I wish we would start using the word rewiring instead.
Whatever. But I mean, it's, there is a transfer of wealth in the United States right now that's unprecedented. Trillions of dollars from the Reagan era IRAs are being transferred. I'm the eldest of the baby boomers. And from us, it's going to our kids. Now, it's not going to my kids because I'm keeping it. But I was talking to the president of TD Bank in the US, and he told me that the problem is that my financial advisor isn't going to be appropriate for my kids. They want a contemporary. And when I started writing the book, I found out that in Japan, which has the longest lifespan of anybody, they're bringing people in their 80s and 90s out of retirement to deal with people in their 80s and 90s who have financial issues. So as long as you are mentally acute, you are able to contribute to society. And that's what you should be doing.
Oftentimes it takes a major jolt to see massive disruption and changes in the world, as we saw and witnessed after both world wars and 9/11, and now the pandemic. How do you predict the world will be forever changed, particularly the business world, as a result of this pandemic?
Here's my view. I've trademarked a term called no normal. There's not going to be a return to normal. There's not going to be a new normal. We got to get rid of this word normal. So I called it no normal. And I think that people are looking at things completely the wrong way. I'm a contrarian by nature, right? Volatility and disruption are offensive weapons to be feared. And if you look at the great companies, if you look at FedEx, if you look at Apple, if you look at Amazon, if you look at Uber, if you look at Dyson, I could go on and on and on. These are companies who are deliberately disruptive. I mean, Charlene Lee will back me up on this, I'm sure. And what we want is deliberate disruption. We want to be volatile. We want to create not unhealthy turmoil, but a positive and creative volatility so that we all advance. If you are not innovating, and there are three kinds of innovation, but if you're not innovating, you're not growing, because the only way to coast is downhill. And if you think you're on a plateau, the laws of entropy, plateaus erode, you go downhill again. So the only way to continually grow, and this is why Sears did not morph into Amazon, is you've got to keep innovating and climbing.
Yes, and that's what I love about being coached by you and in your community, because you keep that fire alive for thousands, and by now probably millions of people. I want to really say from the bottom of my heart, Alan, thank you for being an innovator and an icon in my life, because you truly are constantly building a lifelong legacy. And we look forward to having you back with us again, Alan.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, Lisa. I really enjoyed it, and I'm happy you thought of me. Thank you.
Such a pleasure. All right. Well, we'll see you next time, and we'll see you soon in Atlanta.
I'm looking forward to it.
Definitely.
You can buy me a drink.
It's a deal.
Okay.
It's a deal. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, take care.
You too. And we really had so many great points today, and I'm glad that Alan was with us. And yes, Charlene, rethinking disruption as a positive change. If you're not creating change, then you are not a leader, you're a manager. And make sure you make that distinction. And I also want to add to that, Charlene, and say, don't let job titles dictate which one you are. I recently met with a CMO of a $1 billion plus organization who is only a CMO in title because they are under the thumb of the general manager, and they are not allowed to invest in new technology, professional development, and growth for their organization without constant supervision and approval. So they're truly only a CMO in title. So look around, up and down and all around your organization for these innovation avatars who are building marketing and company legacies. Well, this was such a lively discussion. Now it's time for the mindful moment. This is when I look back at what we just heard today from Alan, and I come up with 2 or 3 real takeaways for myself and hopefully for you. And I think it was Peggy Lee, or it could have been Joni Mitchell, who once said, take what you need. It was Joan Baez. It was neither of those women. It was Joan Baez in one of her songs that said, take what you need and leave the rest. Here are some top takeaways from today. Number 1, follow the lobster principle. Make sure that you shed your old skin so you can get bigger. The story I told earlier is a true story. I really did grow significantly when I was willing to shed products and services that did not fulfill the mission of my company, which is to help marketing leaders build more sustainable companies and get promoted faster and have better lives. That's all I do all day, 4 days a week. Of course, 4 days a week, because on the 5th day, we live stream. Number 2 is the reflection after losing a sale. This happened to me recently. I had a long-term relationship with a senior marketing executive. I helped them get promoted. We worked together so they could join a board of directors, which they did. And they were also successful at moving from a smaller company to a $100 million company in their career. They got a great promotion. They chose not to work anymore with me, and it was quite a shock, actually. And I made the mistake temporarily of thinking, oh my gosh, there's a problem with my business. And of course, I lived in that space for 3 or 4 days, and then I bounced back. I bounced forward because I talked to my coach and I talked to my partner, and they said, Lisa, this is not a trend. This is a one-time event. Don't confuse the two. So when you're out there and you have a setback, just know that it is only a temporary setback. It is not a pattern. And so my final takeaway is that you can leave a legacy no matter what your age. So you're 20, you're interested in a marketing career, or you're a senior marketing leader, you're leaving a legacy every day. What do you want that to look like? Remember, the definition of legacy is simply outdated, and now is the time to rewrite our career and life playbook, not when we are facing our demise or when things are going smoothly. I hope you enjoyed today's session, not only with my mentor, Alan Weiss, but with our lively audience who joined us from across the world. Join us on the 17th of September for the Mindful Marketer live stream, where I welcome Todd Churches from New York City, who's going to be talking about being persuasive and the power of visual thinking. We need to influence people in new ways, especially now that we live some of our lives behind a screen and we get to work with people from across the globe. I want you to be successful and mindful in those interactions. So until I see you next week, be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, sign up for our newsletters and our know ahead list for all of our events twice a month on LinkedIn Live, and make this weekend a mindful one.